War II was the largest and bloodiest war in history. Between the German invasion of Poland in 1939 and the surrender of Japan in 1945, it is estimated between 50 and 70 million military personnel and civilians were killed. More than 61 different countries sent soldiers into battle, including 16 million men and women who served in the United States military. Your Central Indiana Ford dealers take pride in honoring veterans from this and all wars by bringing you the stories of 4 local men who answered the call to serve and defend this country. Each awarded the Ford Oval of Honor in recognition of service to our country as defenders of freedom, and each truly being an American patriot. Military service began for Frank Chambers in January 1943. After basic training, he was assigned to the 735th Tank Battalion. He was sent to Fort Lewis, Washington for specialized training, then sailed to England in February of 1944. All that training gave Frank an optimistic outlook on his mission.
I thought we were going to win it all the time. I mean, just a question how long it's going to take, but yeah, we got all trained up there in England and got our tanks all fixed up, and we knew we'd get it done, just a question how long.
In July 1944, the 735th and Frank Chambers deployed to France, just over a month after the initial invasion of Normandy, and soon was engaged in fighting.
Attached us to the 1st Infantry Division and put us right up on the line so we get some firing experience, and then we also got some hedgerow experience, which was quite a deal because they had to attack those hedgerows where there was one every 50, 75 feet. There must have been 1 million of them. We would fire, and then the infantry would go up and put a satchel charge on the hedgerows because we couldn't go through them. And then one tank would go through, and then after a whole platoon of tanks, then the infantry would come through, and then we had the whole same thing to do on the next one.
Moving east across France, Frank and the 735th assisted in the liberation of the town of Angers, setting a pattern for that part of their war.
It was easy. We went in one morning, and by the next afternoon it was all over. So there wasn't any serious. The only serious thing is we got 76 bottles of wine there. But then when we went right up the highway, and nobody was in the tank but the driver. All the rest of us sitting up on top just having a ball, Next town we went was the Chartres, and we stopped out west of Chartres about 2 miles, and it was evening, and waited till the next morning, and went around, came in from the back of it. By noon, it was all over there. And so that was pretty much the run across France, was run 25, 50 miles, and then do some fighting, and then another run.
Frank's unit was assigned to the U.S. Third Army, which was commanded by one of the war's most famous generals, George S. Patton. Though some hold a negative opinion of Patton, Frank believes it was because they were never under his command.
I don't think they fought with him. He studied war from the back as far as you could go. He knew what it is, and he also learned early on that attacking was a lot less loss than sitting back and waiting. And that was one of the reasons they thought he was bloody, because he attacked when they didn't think he should. But I thought Patton was the best general in the Army by far.
Crossing the Rhine on the push into Germany was an example of Patton's military creativity.
I don't know where he got them, but he had 2. Just flat out like fishing boats. They had U.S. Navy on the side of them. I don't know where he got them. Just little regular old outboard motors. And they took 2 steel treads and taped them to those 2, and we ran out on there right across the Rhine. And that's the way we cross it.
After crossing, Frank says the war for the 735th got easier.
When we first crossed over, we went up and, maybe 10 miles before we run into a town and there was any resistance, and there wasn't much there. In fact, the rest of the war was pretty much they were running away from us and we were running after them. So that part of the war was, after we got across the Rhine, was a heck of a lot easier.
When the fighting in France or Germany did bring them in contact with German armor, The Americans knew they were facing a formidable enemy.
When we got tangled up with those German tanks, we didn't have it. They had it. We just had more of them than they did. But, those 88s, and you look through the reticle on that 88, I don't know how they could even miss. Of course, they had bad gunners for a lot of reasons, but their engineering, as far as equipment was concerned, was far superior to ours. We were out, just our tank one day was just clearing out a field, making sure that there was no Germans in there. And we looked down a hill, and there was a town down there. Well, we pulled into the town, and of course there's always a circle in the town. We pulled up to it and stopped, and sitting right here, 15 feet away, was a Tiger. And his gun was pointed that way. Well, I says, go ahead, boot nose, knock him out. AP, and so bounced off 15 feet. So tried it again, and I said, get out of here, Joe, because fortunately they did not have power traverse. They had to crank it. And here come that gun around. So we backed out, and by the time he got up to where he could get a shot at us, we were gone.
The stress and horror of war affects those who pass through it. His service in World War II had a lasting impact on Frank Chambers.
I was just a brat when I went in, and I grew up fast, and I think it taught me responsibility a lot sooner, a lot better. And the fact that if you stay after something long enough, you can finally get it done.
Elmer Cox was a Muncie Central High School sophomore when the U.S. joined the war in 1941, and he entered the service after he graduated. Cox chose the Navy, but needed a little help to get in.
We start through the process, and one of the first questions they asked you, what branch of service do you want? And I said the Navy. So then we proceed with the physical, and we come around to the weight. I weighed 103 pounds. I was told I had to weigh 107 to get in the Navy. So I drank 3 pounds of water. The gentleman put down 107 pounds for me.
After training, postings to Navy ships went up on the bulletin board. 10 men were needed for the USS Washington, a North Carolina-class battleship, so Elmer selected that vessel. Though initially trained as a storekeeper, he ended up assigned as a talker to the executive officer, who was second in command aboard the Washington.
I was his talker up Battle 2, which was up in the superstructure. I was directly to the captain. He had another talker that was directly to the gunnery officer, so he could go either way he wanted to go. You were pretty much involved in knowing what's going on at any given time, because you're up on the bridge and that's where all the action is.
From that high position on the ship, Elmer had a front row seat to a great deal of history.
It was just amazing to see that many vessels. At Saipan, there were 3 battleships there. The next morning, all you could see was ships for the landing. They all came in overnight. The Marianas Turkey Shoot, that was quite a 4th of July. I mean, planes falling out of the air all day long. There was 360 some, I think, shot down that day. And a lot of them we didn't see them. They was before they got to the fleet. But you could see the dog fights and everything up overhead between the American plane pilots and the Japanese Zeros. When they raised the flag on Iwo Jima, I saw it 1 second later, because there was a big war whoop went up on the island, and we were laying in pretty close and we could hear it. So we just turned and looked that way, and there was the flag.
But he also witnessed events that were very unpleasant, especially at the Battle of Okinawa, where the U.S. had 2 aircraft carriers badly damaged.
On that catwalk we were on, sometimes you may go 10 minutes and have no conversation, so we could see everything. When the Bunker Hill got hit, and the Franklin got hit, it was a pretty sickening feeling, because you could hardly see the ship. It was just engulfed in smoke and flames. And you could see sailors going over the side and everything, and it kind of get to you. They had a cruiser, and I want to say it's a San Francisco, but I'm not positive, came alongside and took the flag off. They took a terrific chance. They just pulled right alongside the burning vessel and took the flag off.
Luckily, the Washington never suffered any losses during the war, but Elmer recalls two especially close calls, one from the enemy and the other from Mother Nature.
We had a torpedo plane make a run on us, come up the starboard fantail, and he was about eye level with me because I was 5 stories up. He cut his torpedo loose, but the back catch didn't release. Therefore, it was hanging straight up and down. Instead of coming on, he turned up the side of the ship, and of course that was it. They just cut him in two with 40 millimeters. And then the other time was the Typhoon. There were 4 destroyers turned clear over. They listed far enough to take water, and that was it. And we listed pretty bad, but it was big enough to hold its own. The bow would disappear under the water, clear up to turret 1, and you just hoped to come back up.
The Washington carried plenty of firepower if it ever came under enemy attack, and from his position, Elmer could see and hear it all.
The 40 millimeters sounded real nice. They went pump, 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 pump. The 5-inch guns is why I'm wearing hearing aids, because they cracked. They made a terrible noise. 16-inch guns, they just roared. They didn't make a noise. They did move the ship about 6 feet in the water when they fired. I'm higher in the barrel. You can just see a flame come out about 20 feet out the barrel.
Elmer values the fact that he served in the Navy and says it taught him several life values.
It learns you a lot of discipline, how to take care of yourself, respect other people. Matter of fact, I'm a little bit of a believer that everybody should go now 2 years. I know somebody wouldn't like that, but that's just my feelings because it gives you a good start on life.
A student at DePaul University before he entered the military, Jack Isenbarger was assigned to the 104th Division, commanded by Major General Terry de la Mesa Allen. Jack was sent for training to Camp Carson in Colorado, where they prepared for the conditions they would face in Europe.
They set up what they call problems, and they had referees, what the white band was this and the red band was the enemy, and we actually, we didn't use live ammunition all the time, but just practiced. It was up in the hills, some of that was in the hills around Colorado, but I don't suspect that we really knew what it was going to be until we got over there.
The 104th went into action at the beginning of October 1944, first in Belgium and then into Holland. They didn't have to wait long to engage the enemy.
The very first night we were in combat, our platoon officer called us, our platoon, together, which I don't recall how many we had in those days, but anyway, and said, well, we're going to walk through the German army tonight. I mean, several of us later years thought, my God, that man, but that's exactly what he said. And it didn't work out that way. We did, I guess, do a little combat, but then we set up in a farmyard. And at night, dug holes, got in, and so forth and so on. And we had some artillery fire coming in because we had an FO, a field artillery officer, directing fire, but it wasn't that bad. But anyway, come the daylight, we looked around. Here was a machine gun pointed at us. We had a mortar pointing it over here, our own guys. I mean, it was, it was almost ridiculous, but we got that corrected real quick.
Serving in a weapons platoon equipped with 60mm mortars, Jack could be as close as 50 yards from the front when he was firing.
We had sights, of course, and your sights told you how many yards you want to shoot, and you set your gun at that level. And if you knew where which you often didn't, if you knew where the enemy was, whatever it might be, why, you could be pretty successful. And a lot of times we'd have riflemen calling fire, maybe down on their stomach, seeing us back there, and they, with their hand gesture and that type thing, it was fairly successful. But we were lucky not to be in the very front.
The fighting often was intense, but there were lighter moments that gave Jack a chance to laugh a little.
We were getting fire from this hedgerow. And what are we going to do? Well, so let's get a tank up here. So we got and here came this British tank. You could always tell them because they had their tea kettles pounding along the side, and they just rattled like, and so here they come, and they fired several blasts in this hedgerow, and then started to back out. And the sergeant and myself was like, hey, where are you guys going? It was tea time.
Time at the front ended for Jack just a couple of months into his combat, as he received shrapnel wounds in his leg from a tank round.
It was getting light, but it was dark. And we started out in pretty good shape. We did catch a lot of fire to start with. But then all of a sudden we could tell things weren't going so well ahead. And I saw this tank, maybe 200-300 yards ahead, because there was some raised ground and you could see him coming up, and I could see him turn. And I didn't remember the tree, but I told the guys, there were maybe 4 of us, I said, hit the hole because there's a great big shell crater. And we did. So all I did was detonate a shell into the top of it, and of course, shrapneled up. And we got 2 ammo bearers. One guy had a broken leg. I got hit.
After spending nearly 4 months in the hospital and 2 months in France in officer training, Jack was on his way home to the States when the war ended. He said you were always nervous, but you couldn't let the nerves take control.
You couldn't get too wrapped up because you had to do your job. And I just don't recall ever really getting to the point where, I was just worried sick that something was going to happen. And if it did, it did, I guess. And he said, were you ever scared? And I said, all the time.
Enjoying a night away from his studies at Purdue University, Fred Glancy heard the U.S. had entered the war from newspaper boys on the street.
We just come out of a big production of ice skating in Indianapolis. And the person that put on the show was a lady by the name of Sonja Henie, who had won the Olympics in ice skating. And we'd been to that show, and as we come out of that show, there were kids outside yelling, war, war, war. Read all about it, and holding up the papers and everything. And we got a paper and took a look, and it was when Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor. Right away, I really began to think about the war then.
After graduating in 1943, Fred entered the Marine Corps. Following basic training and officers candidate school, he was sent to the 4th Marine Division headquarters in Hawaii, where he worked with the commanding general to set up a training program for the soldiers.
I said, well, I'll tell you, I noticed that we have a lot of equipment here, and a lot of it is new equipment, new kind of equipment that's being made, such as a Bangalore torpedo. And I said, there's all kind of booklets on it, there's a film on it, there's slides on it, there's all kinds of things. And I said, what we could do is to show those to the troops by movie, by the slides. We could give a lecture along with it, going along with the booklet, and just all kinds of things. The general said, I want you to draw up a training program for this division.
Fred also helped train the 5th Marine Division until his unit received orders to ship out late in 1944. The trip across the Pacific took about 6 weeks. Destination, Iwo Jima. Fred was in the 3rd wave to hit the beach, which soon became a scene of chaos.
They formed 3 great big circles, and then all of a sudden at a certain time, they all lined up, and the first line went in, the second line went in, a third line went in. And they were a little bit apart so that The first ones could go in, let down, get ashore, back off, and the others go in then and hit and back off. It wasn't at 10 minutes, even the second wave going in, it was just nothing but solid bursts of shells again on the beaches, and it was the Japanese of throwing the bombs, throwing the artillery in and mortars and everything there. And you couldn't dig a foxhole or anything like that. There was no way to do it because the beaches were ash, and the ash was no footing with it. You sank down. Every time you put your foot down, you'd go about like that, and then when you'd dig, and it was sort of uphill, and as you dig to go, you'd even push everything back pretty easy. And it was just, you'd slide. As you'd go up, you'd go from one shell hole to another, because that was the only protection there was on the beach. There was nothing else.
Fred's first job was to set up the battlefield headquarters for the 4th. He also took his turn commanding his unit.
About every day or every other day, I would have charge of the division. And it was really interesting because I'd sat there over these maps, and with the guys with the communication, and they would tell me, that there was a attack or a bunch of Japanese forming over at a certain place and everything, and I'd call for artillery or mortar fire or to one of the regiments to do this or to do that, move up the reserves, move them up to fill in a spot, and just all kind of things.
Originally planned for 4 days with provisions for 10, the fighting on Iwo Jima lasted more than 30 days. But Fred said the island needed to be taken to aid bombing runs on Japan.
They could go from Guam clear to Japan and bomb and get back. They had to go bomb and get back. They couldn't monkey around. So they needed some place that they could pick up a bunch of fighters to go with them to protect them. And this island was 600 miles approximately from Japan. And a fighter plane could go into Japan and get back from that island of Iwo Jima.
Fred says his service changed him and set the course for the rest of his life.
I think I grew from the service, and I appreciate life. It changed me in that way. It changed me in that I am a more religious man than I was. I promised my Lord that if He got me through the war, that I would do certain things to offset all of the help that I'd got. And what I'd spend my life would be helping people and working with people, which I've done.
The war in Europe ended in May of 1945, but each of our veterans would have had one more mission, the invasion of Japan, had President Truman not made the decision to use the atomic bomb.
We suddenly realized that we weren't finished in Japan yet. And I can remember sitting there talking, and obviously that was next.
We were headed for the Pacific. We were getting ready to go when they dropped the bomb. We would have been in Japan eventually if we had made it that far, They would have lost, if they hadn't dropped that bomb, they would have lost hundreds of thousands of troops.
That was war, and I'm so glad Harry Truman was there, because I just don't think some of our presidents would have dropped that. I'm sorry for those people that lost their life when that bomb came down, but it saved many more.
We were going aboard ship when the war ended, and we were going to go aboard, and our destination was Japan. And if it hadn't been for the atomic bomb, we would have probably gone in.
On the boat coming home, everyone to the last man say, well, Harry Truman saved our life. And he did.
Our 4 honored veterans don't believe they did anything special. just what was asked of them. How would they sum up their time in the U.S. military?
I'm just glad I did it, and I guess it's because I never got hurt. I saw a lot of things. They always say, join the Navy and see the world. I saw the world, but the only place I got pictures of it's up here, because you couldn't take any pictures.
Well, when it came down to it, get the job done. Horsing around you could do when you wouldn't bother anything, but I guess it was, the guy says, I had a wonderful experience, but I wouldn't want to do it again.
It was duty, you know. It was had to be done. I mean, the service was, yeah, it was, but duty was the thing. You went out every day. That was your duty. That was your part of the war. And if you didn't do your part, you're letting somebody else down. So it was more duty, I think, than service.
I've always felt sympathy for all the people, both sides and all the people. I feel a sympathy because there's no need for war. I wrote to my folks and I said, Dad, they always say war is hell. They haven't come close. They haven't come close.
Saturday, September 7th, during a ceremony in their honor, Jack Isenbarger, Fred Glancy, Frank Chambers, and Elmer Cox each were awarded the Ford Oval of Honor Commemorative Award for their outstanding bravery and service to our nation during World War II. WIPB, Ball State Athletics, and your Central Indiana Ford dealers want to thank all veterans for their sacrifices and service to our country.